Good morning, colleagues. Thank you so much for joining. As in, I think perhaps we should start now and then.
Okay, so just thank you, Risa. And also a big thank you from my side. We're thrilled to have colleagues joining from, I think, different places around the world. I'll have the pleasure to just give the floor to Mr. Patrick Duong, who's the Global Lead for Governance for Public Goods and Services at UNDP, to open this webinar, the sixth webinar in the series. Over to you, Patrick.
Thank you very much, Azin, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, colleagues. It's wonderful to see you all on here on this call. I mean, this is, as Azin just said, the sixth webinar, and I think it's getting more and more traction among all of the colleagues working on this very important agenda, which is legal identity. I'm just here to also represent Sarah Lister, who unfortunately is not able to join us this morning. As you know, she's the lead governance from UNDP, and myself, I'm working on the portfolio on public goods and services, which where legal identity belongs to. With this, I'd just like to maybe mention a few things here. First of all, the fact that we are seeing today an increased demand from country offices, from governments, of course, to start further digitalizing their ID system, which is good. And this is very much in line with, the commitments and the message we have heard on the side event during the General Assembly, which I think we all welcome. Something that is, of course, very important as we embrace new technology. And of course, we all know that countries are very eager to very often to immediately focus on the tech side of it. Often what we see is less concerns around, issues of human rights, issues of good governance, as well as, the fundamental issues of how do we respect privacy of people and as we share data and so forth. So I think today this webinar is critical because, of course, we need to continue to support countries in this digital transformation that they all embrace. But fundamentally, beyond the tech side, we really need to put a focus on the human rights principles and the good governance principles. And this is why the two products that will be presented and discussed today are, for us, essential. They're essential because I think they, first of all, list and really bring our attention on what needs to be looked at, what are the key principles that need to be observed, and this is critical. And a lot of this is, for instance, in the model governance framework that UNDP has designed with many of you on the call here. And I want to thank all of the different participants that have contributed to this model governance framework, which is critical, but also very much the second product, right, which will be presented by your colleagues on the checklist for the UNCT. Now, we all know the importance for UNCT to have tools that are very practical for them, right? Often we don't have always the right capacities within our country office in these new fields. They often look for technical support. They look for thought leadership, as well as, very practical tools that they're able to immediately translate in their own systems and country context. And this is where I do think that the checklist that is done for the UNCT is extremely important. I believe that all these two products still needs to be further enhanced over the next months and years. That's totally normal. But I want to really commend both the two presenters for putting this together, and also look forward, the lessons learned that will come from the utilization and implementation of these two tools. So with this, maybe let me turn back to you as and to the presenters for the two tools. Thank you very much, colleagues.
Thanks very much, Patrick. So we'll dive right into the presentation of the first toolkit, which is the UNDP's model governance framework of digital legal identity that was launched last month. And we'll have the pleasure of having Risa Arai, who is a program specialist on legal identity in UNDP, and Emrys Schumacher, who's advisor on tech and human rights, tech and democracy in UNDP, to present the framework, and then we'll have short interventions from two other speakers, and the aim is really to have your reactions to these toolkits and your input on how to further use and strengthen them. So over to you, Risa and Emrys.
Thank you so much, Yasin, and thank you everyone for joining today's presentation. So in the last 5 years, because of also the impact of the COVID, we are getting a lot of requests from the member states to digitalize legal identity system. And in digital ID, it's getting a lot of traction. And because it has a lot, I mean, McKinsey company, they estimated the 3 to 13% GDP growth with the implication, with the impact of the GDP, with the impact of the digital ID. But at the same time, as UN Legal Identity Agenda Task Force, we are really concerned that there are still 850 million of people who do not have any means to prove who they are. And the women are worse off in terms of the obtaining the identity credentials. So there are lots of work still needs to be done to make sure that everyone has either physical or digital identity. But even though there are many attentions on the digital ID, when you establish the digital ID, there are lots of things to consider, not just about technology, but other aspects of the governance. Like how, is there any data protection and privacy that government needs to follow? What would be the sustainable procurement system for the government to purchase or make the software solution behind the identity system? How private sector should be involved? How, because the legal identity system and digital system is so interoperable, how should the coordination happen, etc.? So there are a lot of considerations to make. But because of this like excitement around technology and then its implications, we were worried that not enough attention was paid to the governance. Therefore, and then when we looked at around the world, there are many examples of inadequate governance systems. So for example, there were court cases in some countries that it is unconstitutional for the government to obtain the biometrics information of the people for indefinite period of time. Or for example, even though the court says that having digital ID shouldn't be the mandatory to access to private or public services, they often implement that way. So there are no like proper mechanisms to monitor what's and then make corrections. In some countries where the ID is managed by the security sector, it is really difficult to make complaints and then ask for the correction mechanism. So there, like, as you can see in this slide, there are a lot of examples where the proper governance mechanisms needs to be in place to ensure that this digital ID system is human rights centered and inclusive. So in the nutshell, digital ID systems are rapidly deployed throughout the world, but the governance system needs to be strengthened. And then this is the area of the UN can have a comparative advantage. And then we need to ensure that the member states do consider the human rights aspects and governance aspects at the design and the implementation of the digital ID scheme. So that's why we developed this model governance framework for digital legal identity. And this was developed in coordination with the BPPS Chief Digital Office and then consultants, Emrys here, and another 3 prominent amazing consultants who worked with the team. And we expect that this governance framework is useful to identify where there is a gap in terms of the digital ID governance in this particular country. And then we can use this framework to make concrete recommendations how that existing system can strengthen to make sure that their digital system is inclusive and human rights based. So before I hand over to Emrys, who can do a deep dive on how to use the toolkit and then to introduce you what's the components of this toolkit, I just want to quickly mention that this toolkit is for the UN colleagues here today, also for donors, for CSO colleagues, for all the stakeholders, obviously for the government, who are interested in building a human rights-based digital identity system. And then this is a kind of model way of using this toolkit effectively. So first, we expect the users to study the framework and identify valuable national use cases or purpose of the ID system, so that they can either like use the comprehensive all of this toolkit or pick some of the important components out of these toolkits and then apply for this particular use case. And then and then also users can conduct desk-based research, interviews with key informants to map the framework against your findings. Then the gaps will be identified, and if there is a missing information, that users have to do more research, going for the missions, etc. But after completing the mapping, you can identify where is the gap, where is the strength, and then based on that, you can engage with the government, convening a multiple stakeholder meeting to validate the analysis and make recommendations how to strengthen the governance system. So in a nutshell, this is like overview of the framework, and I'd like to hand over Emrys on how to use this framework and then what the details of it. So over to you, Emrys.
Thank you, Risa, and hello, colleagues. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and thank you for making the time to join us. It's a privilege to share this work with you. I'm going to be as brief as I possibly can. I know that other panelists have a lot of important material to share and also competing commitments. I want to say one thing briefly about the framework at a macro level, which is that this is part of UNDP's broader work around digital public infrastructure. And within that broader work, which has made huge progress in developing technical solutions to some of the key challenges that the process of digitalization and digital transformation faces, this makes a particular contribution and reflects UNDP's commitment to really ensuring that it's not just technology that is part of digital transformation, but a wider, broader whole of society lens to thinking about how to effect effective sustainable change and how to ensure that it's rights-based, protective, and inclusive. And these themes are very explicit in the governance strategy and in the digital strategy. And it's been a real alignment of approach between the governance and digital teams here to think about how to make sure that this really cutting edge approach to thinking about the role of digital is strengthening and supporting UNDP's particular approach and contribution to supporting development and digital transformation in particular. So just to echo what Risa was saying, that this is part of a recognition that digital transformation is not just about technology, but about a wider ecosystem and governance lens to support that. It's important to say, and I'm going to share my screen in a moment, but just to talk through briefly what you can see on the slide that Risa has shared. The governance framework is well, Ben and his team have made this incredibly accessible. As we were producing it, the content is very detailed, rich, and complex. So it's been great to really make this a framework of insight and depth that's actually accessible. The framework has 8 core components. So the idea is that this isn't just a governance framework for the state or for legal institutions, but reflects that whole of society approach to thinking about digital transformation that is so important. And so there are 8 core elements. And those 8 core elements, as you can see in the circle, I don't know whether you can read it on your screen, but let me just very quickly run through them there. Equality and non-discrimination, accountability and the rule of law, legal and regulatory framework, capable institutions, data protection and privacy, user value, procurement and anti-corruption, participation and access to information. I've run out of breath just saying that. So I'm sure that a lot of the detail of that is kind of hard to grasp hold of. But the point to make here is that each of those 8 themes have a lot of detail underneath them to support thinking about how would we put in place the elements that need to be in place to ensure that a technology system is governed, protected, supported, and accountable in the right ways. So each of those 8 detailed themes have a sub-elements that constitute the detail of what this theme addresses. And those sub-elements are structured around an anchor question. So when you're using this as an assessment tool, supporting a partner, maybe a government or a civil society organization or others, to really think about what needs to be in place, as Risa was saying, the anchor questions can help you be very specific about what you need to know to think about what this strategy looks in its entirety. The other thing to say that's really important is this is a big framework. It is a holistic framework. It covers everything. Well, I hope, because we've spent a lot of time thinking about it, most things. But this isn't prescriptive. And one of the things to say about the framework is it's both a living document. We welcome feedback. It will be updated and it will evolve as people use it. It is a digital public good. So as people change it, it will evolve and be shared. It's open source. And the second thing to say is that it's also flexible. It's possible, and we encourage the use of it in a way that meets context and the demands of a particular context. And that means you don't have to use all of the 8 elements. It may be that accountability is a particularly important theme for whoever wants to use this. And so this framework allows the user to think about which themes are most important, to use all of them, or to use the ones that are most appropriate. That being said, let me just very quickly share my screen and run you through what the content of those more detailed elements are. And I'll be as quick as I possibly can, because I know that we have, oh, I can't share screens. Risa, perhaps you could share your screen and I can talk through the different elements.
I think now you can share. Can you try again?
I can try again. And here we go. Can you see that, everybody? Fantastic.
Yes.
So this is the website. The address, I think, was shared. It's governance4id.org. It's, as I said, it's in beta, so we're still welcoming feedback as we develop it. As you scroll down, you'll see it describes what it's for. It describes that beautiful governance wheel that Ben and his colleagues put together that makes the whole framework so accessible. There's those 8 themes that I mentioned, and each of those themes, and let's just choose, for example, capable institutions. You click on that, you can see there's a description of what this element contains and what you should be looking for when you're looking to use the framework as an assessment or a guidance tool. You explore the framework further, and it gives you an overview of the framework. So you can see again what the description of those elements are. There's the sub-element details, and you can see there's, for example, the independence of agencies, managing identification, budget for the management of identification, staff qualifications and capacity, all these different sub-themes that make up the content of these sub-element details. And as you look to the right, you'll see that there's an anchor question here. And these provide the basis for the use of the framework as a tool, the questions that you ask when one is conducting an assessment. Importantly, as Risa was saying, this is a rights-based tool, so it really does emphasize the importance of thinking about what happens if this isn't used, or what happens if this framework is applied and the elements are upheld as they're suggested. What are the rights implications of this tool? And then, of course, this is not prescriptive, so what we've described in the example scenarios are, one might call them ideal, but one would not want to suggest that if they're not in place, that they're less than ideal, because we wouldn't want to criticize or be seen to be judging partners. We work collaboratively. But it describes in detail what the outcome of that particular element would look like. So, for example, here we'd be saying an ideal element for the sub-element detail of the relationship between different agencies would be that the responsibilities and authority of the different ministries or departments who are ultimately responsible for the management of digital legal ID are clearly established in law. The relations between different entities is clear. The law is publicized, the public are aware of the roles and responsibilities of each agency in relation to the identity system. And then these aren't just themes or issues or approaches that we made up because we thought they sounded nice, but they're actually grounded in existing best practice, in policy, in other frameworks that are all already well established and recognized. The point being that this is a contribution to an existing field. It builds on existing work, and it should complement the work that's already being done. So, for example, the World Bank's Principles on Identification for Sustainable Development is a document that has got wide donor support and commitment, and so many of the elements in this would align with those existing standards and so on. As I said, there's 8 other elements within the framework. I would love to go through in detail with each and every one and get feedback and use it as a basis for discussion. But I'm very conscious of time, and I'm conscious that we have other partners who have really important work to share. So I'll stop there. I know that Risa and the rest of the team are really keen to engage and happy to answer questions. Myself also, this is something I believe is particularly important in this sector and area, particularly. And I'm really excited to see how this grows and develops. Thank you for listening to and being a willing audience for this work. I'll stop sharing now.
Thanks so much.
Back to Azim. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Emrys, and thanks, colleagues. Congratulations on another unusually interactive tool from a UN perspective. So Dinah Sørensen, I will pass the floor to you for comments and immediate reactions before we proceed.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Really great to be here in this call. I think when Risa first introduced, you know, the tool and the governance framework, it was really very interesting. And I think it is very interesting in our case, in our team, in the inclusive growth team, as we work on social protection particularly. I think there are quite a few linkages when it comes to social protection and legal identity, and we must recognize the, the mutually reinforcing nature of the two and how they can support each other in various ways. I think for us, during COVID-19, and as Patrick already mentioned, and Risa also indicated, that really the interest from countries has increased significantly. During COVID-19, the interest was really sparked by the necessity of expanding social protection coverage in a very limited time in response to a specific crisis. And we have seen that in other crises, be those climate-related crises, that you really need to respond very quickly with social protection programs, be those earthquakes, you name it, right? So usually the need is sparked very often in response to a specific crisis. And during COVID-19, I think in total, we supported roughly 35 countries in terms of expanding the digitalization specifically of social protection systems. And I think that is very important to indicate that the demand in that front is quickly arising. But going back to the legal identity, when it comes to the digital legal identity in particular, I think when it comes to social protection, it has several ways in which it supports social protection. And the first one I would like to highlight is really about access to social protection services. In order to get access for any citizen in a country to social protection program, legal identity is key, particularly for those that are the most marginalized and vulnerable segments in society, and to ensure that they're not left out of social protection programs. The second element that is very important is when it comes to targeting, right? Because targeting is very often, and participation in social protection, coverage of social protection programs is very often targeted, is very often conditional in nature. I think having a digital legal ID system is really very supportive of that. A third element that I would like to emphasize, and probably this is also the one that is strongest linked to the framework that was just presented right now, is really about the interlinking of social protection systems and social protection databases and registries, with the need for interlinking it with other systems, be that tax authorities, be that civil registry. It could easily be unemployment benefits databases, you name it, like land ownership, etc., etc. So that interlinking is very crucial, and have the foundation of that interlinkage is, of course, is the digital ID, and that is really a key element. But that is also one of the key elements where we really have to be very careful, because when it comes to social protection, the wealth of information that is collected on the individual really raises those data concerns and data privacy concerns in particular. So I think as we support countries from the entry point of social protection, it is very important that we really keep an eye on these framework, and let's not have it as an afterthought in the middle of the crisis, but really let it be front and center of our work in engaging with countries as we support them, be that to improve access, targeting, prevent fraud in the case of social protection, which is also a concern, but also in the longer term in terms of monitoring the implementation of social protection programs, as well as assessing the impact that they have. I truly have to apologize, and I have to hand it back over to you guys, but I am scheduled in 30 seconds to another call. So thank you very much. And again, we look forward to our engagement on this very important topic. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dinah, and thanks for staying despite competing commitments. I have the pleasure also to invite Ben Bertelsen, who's the product specialist with the Chief Digital Office at UNDP, for his reaction to the presentation. Over to you, Ben.
Thank you, Asin, and hello, everyone. My name is Ben. I'm with the Chief Digital Office at the UNDP. Stepping in here today for my boss, Kisam Masali, who leads digital transformation with the Chief Digital Office. There's 2 points I want to make to this. One, that it's been a pleasure from our side as well to work with colleagues and experts in the ID space on this framework, on this toolkit, not just to fill a need in this area, but also to innovate about how we think about tooling and frameworks as a UN organization. Emrys, he showed the page here. Underneath, there's actually also hiding a chatbot that's driven by a ChatGPT technology that we have fed with the existing toolkits and frameworks and principles that we've used to develop part of the framework, and let that think about how to use that and which users can interact with them directly in terms of asking questions. And I invite you all to go interact with that. That is the little orange box on the website that will call a new web page and interact with it. Remember, everything is in beta, but we would be really curious for feedback, and we have done some testing ourselves to ensure that it's safe. But it's a fun tool nonetheless, also for the many non-experts out there. In fact, most of us are non-experts to get a feel for this area. That's the one point I wanted to make. The second one is to emphasize the role of governance as we talk about this area. In the Chief Digital Office and with colleagues, we have been banging the drum and doing a lot of advocacy around the digital public infrastructure approach and supporting governments, supporting colleagues. Think about, what does digital public infrastructure mean as you increase the amount of digital work you do in countries? What does it mean to do a standard-based, interoperable, using open systems in how you think about the systems you're implementing? How does digital payments, digital ID, and data exchanges integrate together? And what does it mean when we, from UNDP side and UN side, say that we want strong governance DPI and strong rights-based DPI? And in this sense, this tool fits really well into this approach and fits really well into what we mean when we say strong governance. When we, for instance, say that you should not think silo-based about your digital stack around your system landscape, be it in transport, education, finance, but there will be some systems for you as a country, for instance, digital ID, that will go across, where it will be the same authentication mechanism, sign mechanism, ID and credentials that will be shared. What does that mean for governance in terms of how you get together as ministries and agencies and plan for specifications, funded, upskilling, capacity building? These are all governance questions that need answering. So we're really excited about having worked together on this to bring this in as part of our DPI response as well within identification. Thank you very much, colleagues, and thanks, Asin.
Thanks a lot, Ben. I just want to thank all the speakers and thank you, colleagues who took the time to tune in. As mentioned, several times. We really hope that you will be in touch with us and provide your feedback on any aspect of these two toolkits or of your own experience with working on governance and digital legal identity systems. Please do get in touch. I don't know, Risa, if we have if the format for getting in touch with us is clear.
Yeah, you can either write to me because my email is written in this invitation at the very bottom. So feel free to write to me and I will direct you to the relevant colleagues.
All right. So with that, thanks a lot, everyone, and have an excellent day.